Hey, how's it going, guys? So in today's video, I'd like to talk about Kickstarter as it pertains to the monster taming genre and what I believe are the basic steps to running a successful monster taming campaign based off of the several successful projects over the course of the last year or so. I think that this video topic is especially interesting because we could also get a discussion going on in the comments from fans of the genre about what makes you want to donate to a Kickstarter. Let me know on what your opinion are the do's and don'ts of Kickstarter campaigns and which Kickstarters, if any, have you donated to or not donated to based on what particular factors. Anyways, with all that being said, let's dive right into what, in my opinion, are the definite do's. Okay, so there are many factors to consider when discussing a monster taming Kickstarter, including timing, pre-Kickstarter relations, presentation and transparency, campaign communication, Kickstarter content, pre-goal versus post-goal, the game's scope, and more. I'll touch on each of these factors as I believe all contribute to a successful Kickstarter campaign. Timing. Now, this is the most chance-based element in my opinion, however it can be influenced to an extent. An example of this is the Kindred Fates Kickstarter, which took place soon after the launch of Temtem and the announcement of the Pokemon Sword and Shield DLC, which in and of itself created a spike in people looking for alternatives to Pokemon. And with Temtem, despite anyone's opinion on the game, definitely showcased to the broader public that monster catching games can and will exist outside of the Pokemon franchise. When Temtem did launch, I and many others had wished we had the opportunity to back the game back in 2018 in order to get some of those backer rewards, and then Kindred Fates popped up and it was almost like a second chance in that respect. Now, that's not to say that Kindred Fates' presentation and pre-Kickstarter game weren't solid, however I have no doubt in my mind that timing did play a great role in pushing the campaign to the heights in which it had reached. Now, like I said, timing is very tough as you don't really know what exactly the broader public will be feeling or what will be trending at any given moment. However, I do believe that trying to keep Kickstarters relatively spaced out from each other and avoiding major Pokemon releases could help. That said, if a Pokemon release has negative feedback, that could also help the Kickstarter as well. So, like I said, nailing timing is the most chance-based on this list, while the rest are much more influenced by the developers. Pre-Kickstarter. Now, I believe that one of, if not the most important phases in a Kickstarter campaign is actually the pre-game, and it'll span for far longer than the campaign itself, even years. Building a community is integral, especially given that the Kickstarter algorithm strives off of an abundance of early pledges rather than a moderate amount throughout the campaign. Building up a community through relatively consistent posts, dev updates, contests, etc. will allow any potential backers to feel more involved with the game. Creating a direct line of communication with your fans is also extremely important in the indie scene, as people are more likely to back the team that takes time for them over the team that does not. If you look at games like the formerly mentioned Kindred Fates, Ova Magica, or Necromancer's Gift, these developers have been consistent with communicating with fans of their games and have been constantly showcasing development well before the Kickstarter campaigns. Now, this sort of leads into my next point regarding presentation. A lot of devs have put time and money into these games well before asking for funds, and to me, that's really important. If you show up on the scene after little or no time leading up to your Kickstarter and haven't put any of your own financial resources or time into the game, then why should anyone else? This sounds rather harsh, but it's a very fair point. The aforementioned developers worked very hard and used their own resources and extra income to support their games and create them in a presentable state, and that's extremely reassuring, especially given a history of Kickstarter projects outside the monster taming community, but regardless, sort of flopping. The campaign. This section will cover some of the previously mentioned points, including presentation and transparency, campaign communication, Kickstarter content, the game's scope, and pre-goal versus post-goal. Presentation and transparency. Now, this part is highly subjective, but deals with the presentation of both your Kickstarter campaign and the game in which you're seeking funds for. As far as a campaign is concerned, I'd say the more information about the game you can provide, the better. What does the game entail in terms of story? What's the gameplay loop? How does the game set itself apart from other games in the genre? Where exactly are the funds going and why do you need them, etc.? Kickstarters with too little information oftentimes will get passed over because people don't feel confident with the information provided. Being transparent with your goals, your funding requirements, and how exactly you'll go about using these funds is vital. This also relates to the game's scope. If the game is promising too much for too little, it may turn people off as well. It's very possible that the developers have a good chunk of the funds needed already and just need that extra push. However, it's important that you state this and be honest and forthcoming with that information. Otherwise, you may end up leaving people confused and suspicious. As far as presentation of the game itself, I've noticed games with playable demos such as Chainmonsters, Ova Magica, and Necromancer's Gift performed quite well in the early stages, and in general, demos are recommended in the indie scene. However, games like Temtem, Kindred Fates, Siralim Ultimate, and Final Stardust all show that a demo isn't necessarily needed if you have a good trailer and constant coverage during the campaign itself. Communication. Now, we touched a bit on communication regarding transparency already, but there's more to it than that. Hyping up your Kickstarter with constant updates, screenshots, monster and feature reveals, new stretch goals if applicable, etc. are integral to the continued growth of the game throughout the campaign. If developers go ghost and there is a drought of content, then the Kickstarter will reflect that. The internet doesn't have a huge attention span. Things come in and out of relevancy on a daily basis with so much contending trends, so it's very important to keep the game relevant through the aforementioned means. I think that Skyclimbers is an excellent example of how to run your 30-day campaign. There was no shortage of new monsters, dynasties, class reveals, gameplay trailers, etc. The devs never stopped with their momentum in hyping up the game, and in turn their funding never stopped or fell off either. If you look at the Final Stardust campaign, Noor streamed the entire campaign every day, all 30 days. That's very important, is to have that level of consistency and show that you're interested in your own Kickstarter campaign just as much as the people who are backing are. Kickstarter content. We touched on a lot of these when discussing presentation, however this is going to go a little more into detail on what the Kickstarter campaign should have content-wise. So of course each campaign should contain the basics such as a synopsis of the game, what you'll be spending time doing in said game, the game's features, perhaps a type chart, a selection of monster designs, environment screenshots, stretch goals, etc. These are pretty typical and don't need a lengthy explanation, but there is one particular aspect of the Kickstarter that I think is extremely important, and that is the backer rewards. Now, of course, physical rewards like plushies, figures, cards, etc. are great, but if physical rewards aren't something that you're able to commit to, then that's no big deal because there are a lot of really cool backer rewards that exist as well. These type of rewards typically involve the community in some way, including the higher tiers that allow for community monster designs, in-game references, backer NPCs, etc. Obviously, it's important to limit these type of rewards, but there's definitely a spot for them in securing some of those mid to high level tiers. Pre-goal versus post-goal. Now, this section is less of something to follow and more of something to be aware of, but basically what I'm referring to is the periods in time pertaining to before the project has reached its funding goal and afterwards. These are two very different times, and depending on how far into the campaign you are, can affect both backer retention and new backers from committing. We tend to see that fully funded games end up bringing even more traffic as people start to use their Kickstarter like a shop, trying to grab all the collectibles or rewards before they run out. It's very unfortunate, however, a lot of people think that Kickstarter will still charge them if a game is unsuccessful, and if the game's goal isn't met early on, backers will actually pull out in fear of losing their money despite this not being how Kickstarter works. This goes back to the whole pre-Kickstarter phase where you want to build a community prior to asking for funds so that when the time does come, you'll have a big head start. That's why you see devs linking their Kickstarters well before the actual launch and asking people to follow the campaign. This notifies the followers on launch, funding comes in very early, and it in turn helps out the algorithm. So it's really important, like I said, to focus on that pre-Kickstarter phase as it all comes together. All in all, I do believe that these are the simple steps to have a killer monster taming Kickstarter. Of course, I've never personally run a Kickstarter, so I'm sure there are many challenges involved in trying to stay consistent and follow these steps. However, I have noticed that those who do follow some or most of these steps are very successful. The monster taming genre is really booming right now, so I do think that in general, success is something that can be achieved for most developers who are making these high quality monster taming games. Like I said earlier though, make sure to let me know what you guys think in the comments. What specifically do you think is integral in running a good campaign? I'm sure there are many aspects that I may have overlooked or missed, so definitely chime in. And with all that being said, if you guys did enjoy this video, as usual, make sure to subscribe for daily monster taming content. You can follow me on Twitter at GymLeaderEd, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.